Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final Visual Voices series of the spring 2021 semester. My name is Mara Glasscock, and I am a house manager at Center for the Arts. I am a white woman with brown hair, and I am wearing a gray shirt and a black cardigan. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to some tools on your Zoom toolbar. If you look, you'll find a button with two capital C's. And if you should require closed captioning tonight, you can click that button and captions will start to appear at the bottom of your screen. Also on your Zoom toolbar is a Q&A button. If you click that, the Q&A box will pop up and you can type in any questions you may have for tonight's artist. And you will also find a chat button and chat box. And there you can say hello to your fellow attendees, tell us where you're watching from, but be sure to make the recipient says to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see your post. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Kenney, Associate Curator of Mason Exhibitions.
Sorry. Hello and good evening. My name is Jeffrey Kenney. I'm Associate Curator of Mason Exhibitions at the School of Art and Design at George Mason University. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to start by acknowledging the Monacan Nation, including the Manahoac people, the traditional owners of the land and waters upon which George Mason stands, and including the area of Western Virginia from which I am speaking tonight. On behalf of the university, I also want to take a moment of recognition and compassion for all of those who have been negatively affected by the continuing pandemic, and to express our solidarity with Black and Brown faculty, staff, students, friends, and all people who have experienced racism and other forms of injustice. As a community, we affirm our commitment to social justice and creating a culture of excellence, inclusion, and accessibility. I would also like to thank the production staff at Mason Arts at Home for all of their hard work in making our Spring 2021 Visual Voices program a success. And I want to encourage anyone that is watching tonight to visit our Mason Exhibitions website and check out videos of our previous Visual Voices speakers from the semester. And I am very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Bruce Willen. Bruce Willen is a multidisciplinary designer, artist, and the founder of Public Mechanics, a design and art studio working in the public and cultural spaces. Bruce collaborates with civic, arts, and design innovators on projects at the intersection of experiential design, placemaking, and public art. Prior to Public Mechanics, Bruce co-founded the acclaimed design agency, Post Typography, where he led high-profile projects that have shaped the visual language of Baltimore and the sustainable building industry. He is also co-author of the book Lettering and Type and has written for the Washington Post, Design Observer, and other publications. Bruce's designs and illustrations have appeared on the covers of Time magazine, the New York Times, and ESPN, among others. His work has received numerous design awards and has been published in dozens of design periodicals and books, including a Post Typography monograph. And he's delivered lectures on his work at many institutions, including Cooper Union, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and Harvard University, among others. As part of his multidisciplinary practice, Bruce also composes music, film scores, and sound art. With his instrumental duo Peals, Bruce has performed in clock towers, museums, and living rooms on multiple continents and has released recordings with the legendary indie label Thrill Jockey Records. Prior to Peals, Bruce contributed to Baltimore's music scene for 9 years as a member of the influential post-punk band Dagger, who was the subject of a 2013 documentary film, If We Shout Loud Enough. And I want to turn it now to Bruce. Thank you, Bruce.
Hey everybody, thanks so much to Maura and Jeff for the nice introduction, and thanks to you all for coming out on virtually, at least, on a Thursday night to to sit in front of the computer. So I'm gonna show a lot of stuff. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pull up my presentation and try and make it as snappy and entertaining as possible, because I know that none of us all want to be looking at the computer all the time. So yeah, hello. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Bruce Willen. I'm a designer, multidisciplinary designer, artist, and musician. Probably best known for my work with Post Typography, which is my former design studio, now Public Mechanics, and my musical groups, Peels and Dagger. So tonight I'm going to share a little bit of my work, and I want to talk about some themes that I found or identified over the past decade or so that run through a lot of my practice. Collaboration, amateurism, and community. So obviously the best place to start when you're talking about all this stuff is with a punk band. This is Dagger. This was the band that I started with my friends Nolan and Denny shortly after college. So Nolan and I were both graphic designers, and we thought it'd be funny if we started a concept band that incorporated graphic design metaphors into the lyrics. In fact, we even named the band after a typographic symbol that looks like this, and is used primarily to set footnotes in typography. So some of the early song titles were songs like Command X, Command V, and Punk Rock versus Swiss Modernism. But after a little while, we kind of outgrew this shtick. But even though Nolan wasn't singing songs about CMYK anymore, the design influence was still pretty apparent in the band's visual output. So I think one of the best things about being in a band when you're a designer is that it gives you all these amazing opportunities to experiment. We created literally hundreds of flyers and posters for our shows over the years, designed all of our own album packaging for records and CDs. This was an EP that we put out where all the covers feature have these cutout, die-cut eye holes in them, and these different mask designs. So depending on which angle you put the CD in or which way you inserted the record sleeve, the eyes would change color. Of course, coming from this sort of DIY punk background, really, I found it has really influenced the way that I approach design and art generally. When you're in a punk band, you're always working with a pretty limited set of resources or have some constraints. This was a poster that we did for one of Dagger's tours, where we kind of run out of time and money to actually print a legit poster and mail it out. So we just sent this PDF around to the promoters of all the shows where we were playing, and with the instructions for them just to fill it out however they saw fit. So they got a lot of kind of fun and weird versions of this at all these cities across the country. And being in Dagger, it gave us this kind of low risk platform to experiment with design as amateurs. And it actually was kind of the precursor to us founding our design studio, Post Typography, in 2007. So I'm not going to talk too much about Post Typography in this talk. This is just flipping through some of the hundreds or maybe probably even thousands of projects that we did over the course of 12 years. But the kind of main point that I want to make with all these is that pretty much everything that you see here was a product of really intense collaboration, either between Nolan and myself or with the other designers at the studio. And that kind of collaborative process was really influential on me. And I want to share a couple projects after this that kind of focus on that. So, what I think makes collaboration so powerful is it's this tool that allows you to see beyond or move beyond your individual perspective. When you're collaborating, you're working with people from different backgrounds, of different approaches and styles, and like doing that, like bringing all these people together, it adds this new kind of dimension to your work. Of course, there's, as like many of you who have collaborated with other people know, there's definitely pitfalls to collaboration. Sometimes one person might not be holding up their end of the bargain, or another person might be like way off in left field, doing their own thing, not being interested in being a team player. But as a whole, I think it's just like really amazing way to create something that is a lot cooler, a lot bigger, and more more exciting than you could have done on your own. I think one thing definitely, like growing up and learning about art and design, I had bought into this myth of there's this solitary genius artist or designer who's like alone in their studio making brilliant work, and I think that's like something over the past 15 or 20 years that's really been like fairly thoroughly debunked, both in like scientific studies and also in just like popular culture. There's almost every project, even if like one person who's typically a man is getting credit for it, there's almost always this like community of people around them who are supporting them, making the project what it is, like better than it would have been if they'd been doing it on their own. Creative breakthroughs are typically team efforts. So the word amateur is, it's typically used as an insult, but I've realized it's another principle that has deeply influenced my creative work. Similar to collaboration, I think like amateurism is a tool for seeing things from a different perspective. I would define it differently from being a novice, whereas being a novice is more that you're completely starting from scratch. You don't know anything about what you're doing. Whereas being an amateur, you maybe have some background either in what the project you're working at, the field you're working on, or an adjacent field, but you're still learning and being forced to try new things all the time. And yeah, and it's also this another tool that makes you see things from a totally different perspective. So going back to Double Dagger for a second, when we first started the band, I decided that I really wanted to try playing bass in the band. I wasn't really a bass player, and when we were practicing, we were just having a lot of trouble at first finding a guitarist to play with. And band practice was starting to get kind of boring because when you're it's just like bass, it's like it got old. So I started experimenting. How can I create more guitar-like tones for my instrument? Or is there a way that I can play it differently that will bring in kind of more sounds? And soon we started to realize that maybe we didn't actually need a guitarist. Maybe play you a little clip of Double Dagger for a second. And so kind of like the limitations of this more kind of like amateur approach to playing an instrument, it really wound up like shaping how we wrote songs. And it helped make our band a lot more interesting than it would have been otherwise. So the same way that kind of like misplaying the bass made Double Dagger better, I've discovered that a lot of artists that I'm interested in or admire also took this kind of amateur approach to their craft. They maybe were working with a tool or a specific platform that wasn't the first thing that they learned, or they weren't an expert in it. and it made their work a lot more interesting. With collaboration and amateurism, I also found that these two kind of like tools or approaches really go hand in hand with building community and interacting with new people. When you're an amateur, you're always having to ask other people for help. You're reaching out to people for advice, and you're collaborating with experts who know what they're doing, whether it's a really good drummer or a really good architect. So the Parkway Theater was a project that we worked on, the Post Typography studio worked on a few years ago, that was for a new film center in Baltimore. And we collaborated with the Sneed architects and a whole giant crew of other people on this project. One thing that's sometimes really nice about collaborating is that sometimes you wind up being in a more supporting role to someone else's vision, such as in this case. In our role as the environmental graphic designer on the project, our job was really to support the architect's vision, or complement it and enhance it. And with the Parkway, they had this like really interesting approach of this like dramatic contrast between historic and contemporary. And we started off with the exterior signage, designing this kind of like really sculptural sign that highlighted the modern aspect of the building and really like stood in contrast to the historic elements of the theater. The sign itself has this like really like sculptural typography that is like abstract from certain angles and then reads in different ways as you move around the building. And it really, it really emphasizes the intentionality of the architectural choice of this kind of like minimalist box on the corner. So the studio had just created this new graphic identity, brand identity for the Maryland Film Festival that was based around this concept of these 3 screens in perspective. And the idea here was not only that, when you're sitting in a movie theater that you see the physical screen in perspective, but also that film is this way for seeing the world from different perspectives, different filmmakers, like people from all over the world, seeing different visions. And this screens motif, it plays a really prominent role in the environmental graphic design of the theater and the experiential design. These frames kind of change shape, warp around different planes in the architecture, and even add these kind of like fun moments throughout, such as we designed this cool like custom popcorn wallpaper in the bathrooms. The Parkway is really a dream project for us. We were tasked with designing pretty much every element that included, a color or typography in the space. And one of the like most interesting things about the architecture is this the main theater in the building is this like really grand historic space that had been abandoned for over 40 years before the festival renovated it. And so rather than fully restoring the theater to its original state, Sneed, they chose to kind of freeze some of this decay in the state that they found it. So it's kind of like goth looking in a really cool way. It's this really beautiful preserved ruin where you can see all these layers of history. And trying to be sensitive to that approach, we actually for all the wayfinding signage, we used paint as the material. And so we wanted the wayfinding to actually add this new layer of history onto the 100 years of paint and plaster that are visible throughout the space. We also brought in these like hits of like very bright, intense colors to distinguish the new elements from the historic finishes. So when you're working on a big project such as a building, collaboration isn't optional. Of the many people that we worked with, this is Greg Gannon, who is a sign painter. And he did all the hand painting in the space. And here he's helping to realize one of the more fun moments that we had, this little Easter egg, where we designed this kind of like giant sign that spans 3 floors in the building. And it's kind of like, it's visible when you ride the elevator or go up and down the stairs. This is Brian Baublitz, who did all of the custom metal work at the Parkway. We worked really closely with him, like not only on this sculptural donor wall sign, but also on this giant steel signage, illuminated signage in the lobby. That's kind of the focal point for the first floor of the building. And it really, it's visible through different portals in the architecture, both inside and out. So at Post Typography, we ran the studio in what I think is an unusually collaborative way that resulted in a lot more interesting outcomes. We worked on, a couple of years ago, we worked on a project with the Baltimore Museum of Art, and this was our crew in the studio at the time. And for almost every project, or all of our larger projects, pretty much everybody got involved in the project in one element or another. So the Necessity of Tomorrows is a lecture series that the Baltimore Museum of Art was getting going that was focused on themes related to art, social justice, speculative futures. And the name for the series actually is coming from a essay by the Black science fiction writer Samuel Delany about the importance of optimistic visions for tomorrow. So kind of taking the seed of this idea of this essay as our starting point, we started to write. And we came up with all of these statements about tomorrow, like what's a more optimistic tomorrow, and like what does it mean if tomorrow artists earn as much as CEOs? How would we get there? And with the design, we took this text and we started to visualize it as expressive typography. It was really important for this project to avoid the white box museum aesthetic. And so we went through dozens and dozens of these kind of fun, like quick typography explorations. Chris and Casey, our 2 designers, were like trading their files back and forth, continuing each other's work. This was one of the first concepts that we developed more fully, which wasn't quite in the mark. The BMA was like, this is a little too hipster. I think they're probably right. Kind of went back to the drawing board, and we pulled in all these like different elements that we'd been working with, especially ones that had these kind of retro-futurist qualities. And at this stage in the project, it was really hard to distinguish like who had even created what. Like everyone had sort of had a hand in the creative process. And eventually we wound up here at this, at this kind of like weird zone that has this pretty like visually distinct look, or at least 4 or 5 years ago was more distinct than it is now. But I think it really like hit on the spots of like where they wanted to be at the lecture, where it's, it feels like this contemporary design, but it has this kind of retro utopian science fiction quality to it. And in addition to these kind of optimistic statements, we of course designed all these standard promotional materials, posters, ads, postcards. But the BMA, like they were trying to think, they wanted to think about how can we reach audiences beyond the art world bubble, and just as importantly, how could we spark conversations? The museum had also not really done much transit advertising before. So it was really exciting for us to, recommend doing these bus shelter ads and then get these, somewhat like radical statements up and like bus shelters all across the city. And then we pushed things even further. And we created this series of these kind of détournements, these little interventions, where these provocative messages are interrupting signage and advertising. And for one event, we even made this fake takeout menu that was stuffed into people's mailboxes. And on the inside was a flyer that was promoting the talk. So these pieces, I think are kind of like halfway in between art and advertising. They're, not specifically so much to promote the series itself, but really to take the themes of these conversations beyond the walls of the museum, beyond the walls of the lecture hall, and also to inject these little surreal poetic moments and poetic spaces into people's everyday life, places where maybe we can talk about the future. This campaign also had participatory elements where we collected people's wishes for tomorrow from the Baltimore community, people who go to the museum. And all these statements were collected on the series website, where people were also able to submit their own tomorrows. And as the series went on and like more of these statements came in, we actually started to take some of the community contributions and feed them back into the campaign for future talks. So taking people's ideas and using them to inform the writing and the posters for the next round. And getting to sort of this place, both through the design and the participatory approach, but definitely it would not have been possible without being so collaborative. The collaboration not only of the designers and everybody at our studio, but also with the community of Baltimore. And this, all of this work and the contributions from so many people, I think it really created this like very rich atmosphere that expanded the context of what the lecture series was. And it also, just as importantly, it allowed people to see their own visions reflected within the project itself. So in some cases, collaboration doesn't always go exactly the way that you imagined. But it also can really force you to rise to the challenge. These are the Ku, Pao, and Pavlina, who are two architect friends of ours. And we met them a few years ago. They're with the Baltimore studio PIKL. And we met them a few years ago, and we talked about working together on some sort of installation project. And an opportunity came up for us to do an installation for the Light City Festival in Baltimore. So if you're familiar with light art or have ever been to a light festival, you probably know like a lot of light art is very flashy, is very much like look at me, very like Technicolor. And we kind of were like, maybe what if we did something a little bit different? Like maybe we can create an installation that's a little bit more ethereal, perhaps activates an unused space, such as under the water. So I threw together a really quick Photoshop proposal, or Photoshop mockup, and we submitted it. And the proposal got accepted. So cool. All right, that was easy. All right, none of us have really done a light installation before. We're not really lighting designers, but we'll figure it out. And we brought in, we reached out to a few expert lighting people to be collaborators on the project who are going to give us technical advice. And then we started by ordering some waterproof lights and dunking them into the inner harbor, which was really about the extent of our expertise in the subject. And then the technical experts who were supposed to help us bailed. This is an actual video of me from that time period. I went through about a month of panic, but eventually, after enough conversations with people, started to patch together enough knowledge that we're like, okay, I think this is how we can make this thing work. So now it was only a matter of building this thing, which with a 25,000 square foot underwater light and sound installation was a Herculean effort, a bit more than we'd bargained for. It took pretty much a solid month of work to put it together. And another pitfall of collaboration that I mentioned is that sometimes one collaborator winds up putting in a little bit more time than others. In this case, it was us. It's the nature of the game. But for the sake of the project, we really like powered through, really committed, and a lot of like really amazing friends and volunteers came through and helped out at crucial moments. And miraculously, it worked. There it is. My cursor had disappeared all of a sudden. Sorry about that. Yeah, there's the video goes on, but you can check out, if you want to see the rest of it, you can check it out on Post Typography or Public Mechanics websites. And I also did the sound design for this project as well. So one of the cool things about working on this installation, it was really like revelatory project for me, because it kind of gave me the confidence to see that I could maybe work on these larger scale projects that transform public space outside of the client context, and even work on projects that are these sort of like self-directed public art projects as well. So in 2019, I said, see you later to Nolan. And I started my own studio, Public Mechanics. Despite what that last photo looked like, Nolan and I are still buds, and we still collaborate occasionally on some projects as well. But seriously though, Public Mechanics is this idea that I wanted to kind of shift and refocus my practice on the areas that are most of interest to me now, and really focused on public and cultural spaces in particular. So, and that includes still doing some design work, but also working on some more like self-initiated public art type of projects as well. And one of the first things that I've worked on as Public Mechanics is a public art installation called The Chairs. So The Chairs is a permanent installation in front of the Anacostia Library in Washington, DC. And it's part of a creative placemaking project, this initiative in DC that is meant to bring these kind of alternative play spaces into the city environment through interactive works of art that have a kind of playful quality to them. And this is another project where I worked with like a really, really amazing team of collaborators on it. And some of the key ones in particular were Tim Schofield, who is a metal fabricator and sculptor based here in Baltimore, and Katrina and Bryony from the Neighborhood Design Center. NDC is an organization that's been around in Baltimore for over 50 years, and they're a pioneer in community design, which means that they create like really high quality urban spaces, architectural projects they're really focused on communities. So that might be working with a neighborhood organization or community group to build a playground or come up with a new design for a vacant lot that turns it into a green space, park, or a community garden. And one of the amazing things about working with NDC is that they have so much experience doing community engagement and really like understanding how to get feedback from the communities and like and channel that into a way that, you know, like that is really like effective for a design project. So the concept that I developed for the chairs, as the name might imply, is a series of these chairs and benches, these sculptural seats that take kind of like ordinary seating and twist it in these kind of surreal, kind of fun, playful, whimsical ways. Taking this recognizable object and making it new again. And the concept was also a nod to the Big Chair of Anacostia, which is this crazy roadside attraction in the city that's on the site of an old furniture factory. So our design concept for the project started off with about a dozen different proposed kind of like crazy chairs and benches that each kind of had these different interaction opportunities or and like methods things you can do with them. So sometimes, like, you know, like when you're thinking about like collaboration and working with experts, a lot of times I think it's really important to remember that your clients or the community that you're working with, many times like they are the expert in the subject. So you know, in this case, you know, working with the librarians, they're on site every day. They really like understand the people, the like patrons who come to the library, how the plaza is being used currently, how it could be used in a better way. And so we did a series of workshops with them to help guide the project. And then in fact, like they were the people who, you know, in the kind of the design competition brief for this project were saying that they were interested in having more seating on the plaza. So that was really kind of the genesis of the idea of the chairs anyway. So anyway, we did one of the workshops that we did with them, you can see on the right, Katrina made these really cool little kind of game boards with these game pieces of the chairs, and the librarians moved them all around on the plaza, and we got a really good sense of like where are the best places to put these, where do people like to hang out, where should, like, what are the kind of sight lines that are important. We also worked with a group of teenagers who meet at the library every week. And they voted on their favorite pieces as well as helped us choose the colors. This was another project where I really felt like an amateur again. It was a learning curve in a lot of ways. Not only did I have to brush up on my 3D modeling skills, but I had to figure out some fairly complex construction for a few of the pieces. Luckily, you know, working with Tim was great because he's, you know, really experienced metal worker. He's, you know, doing this kind of stuff all day, and he was able to advise on the construction, like what, you know, some of the thickness of steel that would work best for each of the pieces, etc. And he helped to take this idea and turn it into this. So for the final project, there are 8 different pieces. And each of the different chairs and benches offer a completely different way to interact with it, socialize, play with it, um, as well as socialize with other people. The yoga chair is a favorite of younger kids. They're really into like climbing on it, hanging from it. And in fact, I think not even half an hour after installing this, bolting it into the ground, this 3-year-old had come over and was hanging off of it and like jumping on it, which was really cool to see. Skewed chairs, as you saw in the background, are this kind of optical illusion which like looks like a regular chair from a certain angle, but are actually like bent back in this pretty extreme way. The seesaw bench has a fulcrum in the center, so you can sit on it with a friend for this kind of gentle teeter-totter action, or it can also you can sit on one end like a normal bench. Friends chairs are interlinked together, and they're sort of designed in a way that the angle you sit on them, you're kind of encouraged to turn towards the person that you're sitting next to a little bit and interact with them. It's also been really cool to see how people are using each of the different pieces, even beyond some of the ways that we'd imagined initially. For pyramid chair, like kids like have fun kind of climbing on it. But then for adults, it's this really like kind of like intimate seating space for 2 or 3 people. And also it's been, let's see, I even saw people having a business meeting on it as well at one time. Frown bench and smile bench are both fun to climb over. And of course, the rainbow chair is great for photo ops. And you get a sense here of how the pieces are spread across the plaza. Okay, I'm getting it's like 5-minute warning. So I'm going to kind of jump through some. I was going to want to jump back and talk a little bit about music stuff for a second. This Peels is some music stuff I do now. I'm just going to skip through this. Yeah, if you want to check out Peels, you can. Some of the stuff is on our website. But finally, I just wanted to close off with this music video that we did, which was another great opportunity to hire people and then collaborate with a much younger set of collaborators in this case. These are 5th graders in Baltimore, and we gave them, for the video, we gave them this writing assignment where they have this prompt, and we played them the song, and then we asked them to write stories while they listened, anything that came to mind. So we got all these great stories back, including some really fun doodles. And then we chose some of the scenes to film. For this project, we worked on it with some really talented collaborators, including Albert Burney, who directed the film Silvio, which is the only movie starring a man in a gorilla costume that has made me cry. Check it out. It's on, I think it's streaming on Amazon. Really great. And Cricket Arison, Dave Cooper, and Phil Davis to bring it to life. And so to end with, I want to share the video, and you can see what the 5th graders came up with. Oh no, sound is off. What happened? So thanks, everybody. And yeah, wanted to also a quick shout out to some of the collaborators here. Incomplete list, but again, much of the work that you see here would not have been nearly as good or cool without these people.
Thanks, Bruce. That was great. I'm just starting to review some of the questions here. And I guess we'll just start with one that was kind of a question about from Gabrielle Ray, who's asking, what was the turning point after college that interested you in typography to pursue it as a profession?
Well, I wouldn't even say after college. I mean, it was in college, or probably even before. I mean, I've always, I think just from a young age, I've always really been interested in words and language. And once you start drilling down on words and language, like how do we communicate the written way? Oh, it's letters. What are letters? Oh, how do we make letters? Oh, it's typography and lettering. And I think probably when I was younger, I wouldn't have articulated it like that, but I think that definitely informed a lot of my interest in type. And then when I was in college, I studied graphic design and printmaking, and just got more into it. I actually did a little bit of type design, or did some type design projects in college. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's like I've now obviously am focusing more on sort of non-typography things, I guess, but still definitely plays like a really major role in my work for sure.
Cool. Sorry, I'm good. Some of these are technical. I'm speaking of typography. Are there specific softwares that you recommend people that are starting out now?
I mean, I guess if you're like working with type, as opposed, I guess if you're looking to actually design a typeface, it's pretty complicated. I'm not totally sure like up on what the best type software is. I mean, there's like ones called Type Tool, and there's a lot of new ones. I think you could probably do a little research and find something better than I would tell you now, because I feel like I'm like the quintessential, yeah, I did that like 15 years ago. And of course, you don't want to use 15-year-old software. I mean, otherwise, I mean, that's one of the nice things about now. I feel like there's a lot of software out there where you can, like even online, like if you experiment with like variable fonts, which is this new kind of technology with like typefaces where you can actually kind of reshape them and stretch them in ways parametrically. And I think there's various like type testers and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, sorry.
That's right.
A lot of students here, so they want to pick your brain. Can we? Let's see. I'm going to combine two questions here. I think one's asking what the favorite project you've done, and another is asking like, what do you see yourself doing in the future, or do you have anything? I feel like is there something that you want to continue going at, because some of these are very different?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone, like we all probably have different favorite projects at different times. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I highlighted the projects that I wanted to show today is because they do have these all have these elements of kind of community and collaboration and amateurism. And I think for me, the stuff that interests me the most is something that has maybe a little bit of a learning curve that I'm not an expert in. And those projects are all, like, honestly, they're always very scary to me every time I work. Even like the chairs project, or I'm like, okay, I'm like designing these, like, I'm not really a sculptor. I've done some 3D work, but I'm definitely not a sculptor. So I have to figure out how to do this sculpture project. And I'm like, that's the reason I collaborated with someone who is a sculptor. But it's still like I had a lot to learn, and there were scary moments during it for sure. I think almost every project there is some, especially if it's like a good one, if it's challenging, there's going to be a moment where you're like, oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing. This is too hard. This is going to be a failure. And I think it's kind of good to have that moment because one, it means that you're sort of in the zone where you don't entirely know what you're doing, and you have to push yourself further, get out of that zone, push yourself beyond what you think you can do. So yeah, like having those projects like that are cool, and just like more and more, I'm like really interested in work that has a communal aspect and is not as tied or as little tied into capitalism as is possible in our capitalist society, which I think it's almost impossible to do work like that, like, you know, living in America, but just like trying to be intentional about the types of work that I am like choosing to pursue, like knowing that it will have some kind of community building aspect and isn't just about making someone money in a way that's exploitative or extractive.
Well, I guess sort of on that, someone's in the chat asking how you find collaborators when you were I guess this is asking when you were starting out, but I think that's a general question, like how do you approach getting projects?
Yeah, I think that's a great question also. It's, you know, it's like not always easy to find collaborators, you know, and I think we've probably all had situations where we were collaborating with someone and it's like, you're like, oh no, this is terrible. This is such a bad experience. Probably, especially when you're in school, when you get randomly assigned to work with someone. So, you know, I think that just happens, but I think with collaboration, part of it is also like, no matter who you're working with, even if it's someone you're really excited to work with versus someone you're not excited to work with, trying to like put your ego aside a little bit and like think about like what can you learn from the other person's perspective, like what do they have to teach and contribute, and maybe the thing that you are really passionate about, you think that you're right about, maybe they're actually right about it. And I don't know.
Right.
I mean, in terms of finding someone who's a collaborator, I think getting to know people a little bit first is always that's the best way to do it. And so, you know, it's easiest to start just through kind of your like social circles or even things you're into. Like if you're into like music or art, if you like meet someone at a gallery opening or a concert who has some like similar interests to you, then you might be like, oh, hey, we kind of see enough of the same way that we find that middle point, but then we can maybe bring our own ideas to the table. And I just like the other thing I would say is that feel free, if there's someone that you like what they're doing, you see their work and you think maybe you have an idea for working on a project together with them, reach out to them and take a risk and do it. I mean, you know, you'll definitely, you know, maybe they won't respond to you or maybe they'll say no, but whatever, that's fine. I've had any people ignore me or say no to me. But it's the times that it happens, or that's the reward.
Cool. One is, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what is the most struggling part is the literal words here of being a graphic designer?
Oh, there's many parts of being a designer. I mean, there's always like, you know, the technical things are hard. I mean, I think clients are always a challenge in different ways. I think, you know, finding good clients sometimes can be hard, and especially like when you're starting off your career, you don't like have as many opportunities to sort of focus on who you're trying to work with. So you'll probably wind up working with some people who you're just like, oh, this is a really bad relationship. You know, and I think in those situations, it's like, similar to any kind of collaboration, is like try and put yourself in their shoes as much as possible and see things from their perspective, even if they're being a jerk or an idiot. Be like, okay, why are they being a jerk or an idiot? What can I learn from their jerkiness that maybe will let me do things better next time? Yes,
Right.
I think that's always a challenge, and trying to like educate clients too. So like as you get better as a designer, one of the things I found is almost every project I want to try and help educate my clients about the design process, or about doing things in a way that's going to yield the best results for everyone. Um, I think too, some clients, you may have to help educate them about ethics as well, and that can be like really tricky if like a client wants you to do something that you're like, oh, this feels a little exploitative, or they want me to put this like button on the website that does this one thing, but really it's it's kind of tricking people into doing this thing that's like not healthy for them. And it's trying to find ways around that situation. It's a lot of people skills, which are hard.
Right.
Yeah.
So I assume in your new role, you feel like you have more control over some of that, or is it?
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm doing currently, doing some of a mix of client-driven work with a couple like self-initiated projects as well. And the self-initiated projects it's great because it's like I have a lot of control over it, but it's also challenging because I'm sort of having to fundraise and write grants for the projects and do a lot of the groundwork that a client might do if they were the ones who were spearheading the project. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like always a trade-off anytime you are working for yourself, frankly, like running a studio or freelancing or whatever you're doing, is that the benefits are having that control of everything. Like you're the one who's making the decisions, and the downside is you're the one who's making the decisions all the time.
Right. This is just for me. I'm just thinking, have you ever worked for another company, or has it always been your own self-initiated?
Yeah, I did work. So when I started off after school, I did worked for a couple other studios. I mean, I actually worked at House Industries, which is a typography studio. Like, well, they're a font foundry, but they also make other kind of weird stuff. I feel like now they're doing more like housewares and other things that are much beyond the graphic design world. So I worked there for like a brief time period, and then I worked for a small design studio here in Baltimore called Shaw Gelda Design. And one of the things I think was like really nice about working at these small studios is that, I was in the room with the bosses while they were taking phone calls, and like, I was really just picking up all the BS that goes into running a business on a day-to-day level, and gave me the sort of false impression, or I don't know, maybe not false, but the idea that, hey, I could run a studio. Sure, it's like they could do it. It's easy. And then 12 years later, I'm like, what have I done?
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pros and cons to working at a small studio, but I think if ultimately your goal is to run your own business, working at or run your own kind of small business or creative business, working someplace small is nice.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That I think sums up most of the questions that we've got here. There's one about, do you design your own album covers? I think you mentioned that in your talk.
Yes.
Anything to expand on that, or?
No, I mean, I think just kind of what I was saying at the beginning, that, I think being a designer in a band is really fun, because you're like, hey, I can just like make this cool album in whatever way I want it, and it's complicated and is whatever way is going to drive me crazy. Sure, I can do it.
Right. Kind of an ideal situation to be a musician and a designer.
Yeah, both for better or worse, because then also once you start doing that, then you're also expected to be doing all the design for all of your stuff. So, but as I was saying with like Peels, it's been fun to commission other people to do work on projects like the music video projects and things like that. So it's also fun to be a designer in a band who hires other artists and designers.
Right. Okay, well, I think that about does it. I just got the 5-minute warning. I think this is a good place to end things. Bruce, I know we haven't got a chance to catch up, but really enjoy seeing you. I think that was a great lecture, and it looks like our chat has been blowing up with good commendations for all your excellent work. So with that, we will sign off.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's nice to see you, meet you virtually, and maybe again someday in the future we'll meet IRL.
All right, good night, everyone.